Today on the Lightroom Whisperer, we're going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to take you on the journey with me through my workflow, from importing images through assessing which ones are worth spending some time on, editing a couple images, and exporting them. We've got a lot to do today, so let's get right to it. Before we get started though, did you know that in real life you and I could actually work together to improve your photography? Whether that be remotely from the comfort of your own living room, joining me around the world at any of the amazing destinations that I lead small group workshops, or even creating your own one-on-one like we're doing here. Lightsource Journeys, helping illuminate your photographic journey. For more information, check out the description below. Now let's get to it. Now that my pictures are imported, I'm going to go through quickly in grid view, and I'm just going to pick out the ones that kind of catch my eye, and those are going to get a 1-star rating right off the bat. I'm not going to zoom in and look closely though at pictures. If there's one that I think kind of looks interesting but I want to look more closely, I'm going to give that a 1-star also right now. And also if there's two that look kind of similar and one might be better than the other, I want to see if one kind of maybe is sharper or has a little more detail in the shadows. Those are also going to get 1 star. And when I zoom in my next phase, that's when I'm going to start comparing those and weeding those out and giving it a 2-star. So let's go quickly through here. It's kind of a cool shot, actually. I'm going to go and give that 1 star. And I'm just using the number 1. I've got a video on star ratings and how I use those to do this. We'll get a little more into the weeds of it. I'll put a link down in the description below for it. But this one definitely catches my eye. So much so that I'm already going to put a 2-star on it because I know that's going to go to that next phase. I don't need to go, is that something I like? Now, these guys are all kind of similar, but I know, at least when I was in the field, these two kind of were getting towards what I liked, and I'm going to give them both a 1-star right now. So let's keep coming down. That really doesn't do much for me. This is kind of cool, though. I wanted to see how this would edit. And now I'm getting down towards the bridge. These guys are also kind of similar. The biggest difference is the exposure is a little different here. I'm going to hit 1 on both. See if maybe I can recover just as much highlight on the bridge or pull up just as much shadow on the hillside. Now I discovered that it's easy to get under the bridge and also legal. So I decided to go wander down there. And same thing, 1 star right now. Give both of these a 1-star right now. Reflection in the puddle doesn't really do as much for me, but it's kind of cool. Let's take a look bigger. Now, out of these 4, they were all a really similar shot, but the biggest difference is that there was a truck driving by on the highway and it had a lot of orange lights on top of it, the 18-wheeler, and you can see the streak across here, and it gave a reflection in the water, which that balance of color from my blue skies at night combined with that orange really kind of balanced nicely as far as color theory goes. So I'm going to definitely choose that one. No need to even look at the other 3. This area was just kind of catching my eye with the shadow and the way it was playing off of here. I think I might take a little closer look at that one there. Same thing, the way the light was kind of playing off was interesting here. Vertical to horizontal. It's kind of interesting. Definitely like the shape of this one here. Let's go with that. Now this was an area where I was trying to shoot and time it to have the car's headlights illuminate the signs up here. And you can see the sign on the edge is illuminated on a couple, but not on all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and just choose that one since I know that the sign is well illuminated. That was my end goal. And just to kind of see what it looks like when I edit these up, I might choose one of these. Now we crossed over to the other side of the LA River, and over there were some really cool trees that definitely don't have leaves on them yet, on these islands that had formed in the middle of the river. And this area here had a whole different feel to it. So I'm going through, trying to both get reflections in the water, but also use those trees silhouettes to my advantage. Kind of like the composition of this one. This one's pretty cool. That's catching my eye, so is that. Let's head down a little further here. I like the way that plays and angles off the other side. And I was playing with the water and the shutter speed through here quite a bit too. There was an area where there was water coming over a teeny little edge, which gave me this nice little ripple to play with, but the water's so gross down there that there was quite a bit of foam forming. So I ended up going and playing with a little variation on shutter speed to see how that foam moving would change the image. So both of these here I'm going to look at it closer because that foam pattern is going to differ because of the differing shutter speeds. And I'm going to look at these three closer. My friend I went down there with, I got a cool kind of shot with him in silhouette and see if one of those really strikes me. Now that's all of them that we quickly went through for that first phase. So I'm going to go filter them now. If you're not seeing that filter up there, you might hit that button right above your return key or your enter key if you're on a PC, the backslash. That is going to hide the toolbar up here. So if you don't see that, go ahead and hit that, and I'm going to choose rated. And it's already selected 1 star, which now has weeded out everything except for these that I chose to look closer at. So I'm going to go ahead and do so. I'm going to pull them up full screen now. And that one is kind of cool. It's kind of a weird trail. It seems like it's worth playing with, so I'm going to hit 2 stars on it. Not all of these are going to be worth going to edit, but the ones that are 2-star is that signifier. Now, this one, I remember there were 2 images that were really similar on this, so I'm going to go down below to my film strip, and that's going to allow me to take both of these. If I hold down on a Mac command on a PC control, I can select both, and then I can go to my toolbar here and do compare view. Compare view is going to allow me to look at the 2 pictures side by side, and I can see if one of them with the angle or the exposure really stands out much more to me. I'm not seeing any loss of shadow detail on there, but I am seeing a increase on like little slats inside of here. I think I'm going to go ahead and 2-star this one. Now I'm going to go back to my grid view. Yeah, this one I knew I was going to go play with. I could have put 2-star on that one to begin with. These guys, though, let's take a look. Now that that's a little bigger, it really doesn't do much for me. So I'm going to keep moving on here. And between these 2, yeah, the exposure is a little different. You might notice that there is a truck starting to come across here, just like in that horizontal one that I had before. It does cover a teeny bit of range. It does give me a nice orange highlight. Oh, boy, look at this plane up here. Looks like a multi-lane highway. Let's see. I think I might go with the darker one, and the main reason is I don't think I've lost shadow detail in there. If we actually go quickly into develop and look at the histogram with this, you can see that it is losing a little bit. It is clipping a tiny bit, and if we go and check out where, it's just in the darkest spots of shade underneath those rocks, and that's okay. But that's going to give me more ability to pull back highlights possibly down the road, where the other one was a little brighter in those bright spots, and I may have lost some of that there. So I think I'm going to go with this one for the 2 that we've got there. And let's see if one of these guys stands out. Now, if you're more of a shortcut person, though, than a button person, you can get into compare view just by hitting the letter C once you've selected the 2 pictures that you want in there. This is kind of interesting. There's not a big difference in here. Maybe a slight bit of exposure difference, maybe a tiny bit of a recomposition, but you can see the way that the water and those gross bubbles are moving through this a little bit more than they are through this one. And that's kind of drawing my eye around. And it does kind of draw me into that reflection of that truck. That isn't necessarily the reason I'd be choosing this one overall, but it does not hurt that I have some warmth on both sides of this bridge here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one, back to my grid view, and let's move on to these 2. Boy, that lens really defines some nice star points, doesn't it? I think, though, between these, I'm going to be able to pull back the highlights in this one and get those shadows up a lot more than the one on the right. So let's go choose him. And this one, when I'm looking at it larger, just doesn't do anything for me, so not everything needs to move on to the next round. This one already has its 2 stars, we know that, so let's keep going. Same thing. This really doesn't do anything for me this way, but let's take a look and see what it looks like in black and white. I'm just going to right click on the picture, go down to develop settings, go down to convert to black and white. And it's kind of cool, but it's still not doing anything for me. So next. Same kind of thing, not really doing much for me now that we're larger. Kind of pulls me off the page in a weird way. I don't think I like the juxtaposition of the mast of the bridge relative to the walkway in this one. This one's kind of cool, but they have the lights off also in the right-hand walkway, so it also has kind of this, like, this yin-yang or dark light kind of comparison to it. Let's bring that one on. That could end up editing up to something cool. That one I'm pretty sure I knew from the beginning was going to get a 2. And now that I'm looking at this a little larger, even with that light on the sign that I was waiting for, not doing much for me. Same here. Now we're getting to some interesting stuff down on the other side of the river. I had a couple here to look at and compare. This versus a couple horizontals. Now, there's 3 here, and even though they aren't the exact same shot, they are pretty darn close. So I'm going to actually hold Shift, click all 3 of those, and instead of compare view, I'm going to use survey view. Survey view is going to let me look at all 3 side by side and see if one of them stands out more than the other versus... Let's see, this one actually seems a little too bright over here. I could be wrong in that, but it looks like it's overexposed a bit too much of the bush, and those highlights might be difficult to recover. So I can come down to the very bottom right corner of this image and hit X, and it takes it out of the running. Now I've just got these 2, which I can go into my compare view and look at if I want to. Now, one thing that's nice about compare view is if you have the lock in the bottom here actually locked, wherever you zoom, it'll zoom to the same spot in both images. So I can see, okay, they're both a sharp image. I don't have to really worry about that so much, but the way the detail and things in the shadow look on this one on the left are a little more compelling to me. Overall compositionally, though, let's look at these separate and see if one stands out more than the other. Oh, yeah, honestly, really no competition when I do that. This one doesn't have as much intrigue on the page, where this one, with the river pulling you one way, the lights and the bridge pulling you others, kind of keeps moving me around in a circular way, and that's really what we're looking for. We want to keep the viewer engaged, move them around the picture, keep them moving in a circular motion so they don't just lead off the page to the next picture. I'm going to give that one a 2, and we can get rid of those. Same kind of thing. We're going to go back into our loop view here. That's kind of cool. I actually like that. I'm going to go and hit a 2 on that. Doesn't do as much for me, but that vertical kind of does in this case. A lot more compelling than that last vertical. And let's see. Does Mike have a... Let's see. Is there one of these shots that I like? It's kind of cool. I also kind of like the way his tripod is almost mirroring the reflection of the tree in the water there, so let's give that a 2. Here it's really just that gross foam bubble that's accruing on the bottom down there and the way the water is moving. So let's see. I think I like the one with more motion in it. There's a bit more of a swirl to the, not the big blob of foam, but the ones that are more loosely moving in the water. So yeah, let's crank on that one. Now that was all of those that I brought to 2-star, so I can go and tell my ratings up here now 2-star. And now we've weeded it down to just the ones we want to spend time on editing. Now at this point, this is quite a bit of stuff to edit, and I won't bore you with every one of these to edit, so I'm going to choose maybe 2 of my favorites out of here. Let's go ahead and this one here we'll play with. And the other one that really kind of grabs me, probably one of these 2 verticals. We'll choose that a little bit more in a second here. So let's go play with this one. Okay, now if we go to develop here, start just by bringing up my exposure a bit, and that's going to reveal a lot more of that hillside, but I don't want that daylight look to start coming on, so I'm going to pull my highlights down. I'm just going to suppress a little bit of that and pull back some of those brights. In fact, I might bring the exposure down just a hair more, and then bring up the whites. That's going to be my brightest spots, like on the bridge, all those highlights that are coming out. Now, I do like to kind of play with the viewer, though. I like them to have to second guess and look at the shot again and kind of really realize it's nighttime, maybe not necessarily understand that at first glance. So I will keep that in mind as I'm starting to edit here. We'll keep some moodiness to it. Now, I'm starting right in the basic panel, and I don't think I'm going to have to do too much outside of there, but if I go in, I can see that my highlights on that bridge are really overexposed. See how much of that I can pull back just in the shot itself. Get the whites all the way down. All of it comes back, so let's see if we can go in with just a specific mask called a luminance range mask. Now this is going to let me take the brightest spots if I take this little slider here and drag it upwards. Reset those actually, because right now I've got this thing tweaked. There we go. So as I drag this is going to allow me to then see which area's got the masking on it. The pink is the only area that's going to be affected at the time, so currently just the brightest spots on this bridge now are going to have any kind of effect. Little slats in between here, and the truck's lights. Now that's going to allow me to then just pull the whites down in that area. And I don't want to go so far that it becomes unnatural, but this is going to at least allow me to kind of pull some of the detail back in there without changing things too much. Now, just to give you an idea of the before and after on that, if I go next to my little mask 1 here, I can go to the little eye. And since this is my only mask, I also could do it up here. But by pushing and holding on that, or pushing on it and releasing, you can see the difference, which is pretty major there. Now, after seeing the before and after, I actually want to maybe bring a little more of that back. It's kind of lost some of its pop. Let's see what that looks like before and after now. Still a little muddy. Let's maybe bring the whites back up. I don't think I want to get rid of everything on there. Now the other thing I can do is watch my histogram over here. That histogram's showing me when I actually overexpose an area by when it's clipping, pushed up against this right side, this little triangle is going to become white or light gray. That's going to then let me know that I'm clipping or losing detail in the brightest areas within the image. So if I keep coming up till now it's clipping, I'm losing that detail there, and then I just back it off a little bit. Now the brightest spots within the image are bright, but it's not overexposing that detail in that area there on the bridge. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to close that and then just brighten up the image a little more overall. Now this is already a pretty punchy image because of all the color in it, but I do want to maybe bring the vibrance up just a hair. Vibrance is like saturation's cousin. This is going to be the balance of colors within the image. So I'm going to go and ramp this up way too much, way more than I normally would, just to kind of demonstrate if the greens don't carry as much weight as the blues, the oranges in this shot, those other ones that have more saturation to begin with are going to kind of stay where they are, and it'll help bring up the other tones to put them all on the same level. Now, if I move this to the right, you'll start to see that it does kind of bring that into range. Now, I mean, obviously, this is way more than I would want, but now you can see there's more balance between each of those 3 main color ranges in here. Now, let's get that back down to a range that doesn't make me want to retch. That looks pretty good, and maybe just give it a little more balance in there. And a pop of color. It's looking pretty cool right now. Now there are a few areas that are drawing me away from my center point in here. The walkway over here gets a little bright, and your eye is always drawn to the brightest part within an image, so it's kind of leading me away from that. losing that kind of wraparound feel that I want. So I'm going to maybe try to bring in another mask. I'm going to use Create Mask, the Linear Gradient Mask. The Linear Gradient is going to allow me to take essentially like a flat line, or if you ever used one in the field, a graduated neutral density filter, where it's half clear and half dense, half gray. That's going to allow me to darken part and have the rest still stand out. This line here being the median line. Right now I have my overlay set to pink, so you can clearly see the pink area here is where that filter would apply. Now if I take this and move it over a little bit, the wider this filter is dragged, the more it feathers, the more it blends. If this is really close to the other side, it's a very hard line that we're looking at there. Now I do want this to kind of blend in a little bit. I don't want it to be very abrupt, so I'm going to drag this out a ways. Bring this median point right about maybe into the water's edge. Bring this out a bit more. And this angle needs to be a little bit steeper, so if I come off that center point, you can see this cursor now becomes a little curved arrow. The further from the center point, the easier it is to maneuver this. But when you push and hold now on your mouse or your touchpad, you can change the angle of that filter. Now let's bring that up so it gets some of the light that's just touching those rocks and the grass there. And I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit. That might not actually be in the range that I need. We're going to bring down the exposure a little. There we go. That's doing what I'm looking for. Yeah, same thing. It was pretty subtle, but subtlety is what leads your eye in these images. You don't want people to really be drawn away from things or know that you've really manipulated this in a massive way. At least for my own style, I like to keep things looking as natural as possible, but really kind of contain the viewer within where I'm trying to keep them focused. Okay, I'm going to close that little guy up. I'm sure you can hear my neighbor's dog out there. And let's just play a little bit with the white balance here. This was an area that mostly had LED lights, and LEDs are daylight balanced. But there's also high pressure sodium bulbs out here, the ones that are more yellow. So right now in my raw file, and if you shot a JPEG, this isn't going to show you a number in the thousands, this would show you a 0 point that you're coming off of. But since we have raw, I can actually go and change the raw file itself, and I'm going to bring a little more blue into this. It's going to help correct some of the orange that the lights around me were casting on the scene. It's going to help separate the orange of the truck going by from the blue of the rest of the scene, which is going to make it feel more saturated. I'm not saturating this anymore, but now that separation of two colors on the opposite side of color theory really start to make you visually feel like it's more impactful. And I feel like the color looks good on that. Let's see what happens when I bring the shadows up a little bit. There we go. Alright, now there's one other thing I do want to do before I finish this out, and that's add a slight vignette. This is something that, if you look at a lot of the landscape photographers or nature photographers that you like, it's going to be subtle most likely, but they've probably vignetted their image. And it's also because of that brightest spot in the image drawing your eye. If we darken the edges ever so slightly, now your subconscious keeps pulling you more towards the center of that shot. So I'm going to go ahead and vignette this a little bit. Make sure we got pretty good midpoint pulling in. You can see the midpoint's drawing in or out where that center point is. I'm going to have this heavily feathered, heavily blended from edge to center point. And then if I pull highlights back, on this shot you don't see a lot of difference, but if there were really bright clouds in the corners, or if that reflection was really bright in the corner, you'd start to see that come back a little bit. That's also something you can use as a tool to make sure that you're kind of helping the image betray the viewer's eye, so to speak. But in this case, I'm going to hit this little before and after on here. And if you were to just glance at this right now, let's see here, where do I want this? Just going to toggle this in a little here, and if you were to look at it right about now and you didn't watch me do that whole vignette, you probably wouldn't notice that it's there. But if I hit the before and after eye, that little subtle difference just keeps drawing you back into that center point more and more. Now, I like that a lot. I don't want to do much more to the shot. I like the color balance on it. I like how it still maintains that nighttime moodiness, but has some brightness so you can see things within there. And I love the way the colors are playing off themselves. Personally, I think the shot's done, so I'm going to give this a 4-star. 4-star for me means that it's something that I like and I think is worth showing people. If this was one that I edited, though, and I was like, it doesn't do anything for me now, that's something I would give a 3-star to. It's still kind of on that progress range of, okay, now I've done something to this, but it didn't really achieve that status of, this is a great shot that I want to share. So now that we've got that one done, let me choose one more here to play with. Let's see, of these two, which of these verticals do I think is both more compelling and an interesting shot? I really thought that the running water here would be more interesting, but I think the grass pulling off the side in this one here is more interesting. Let's see how much of that shadow detail was maintained in that shot. So let's start off, we'll just go into develop here. I'm gonna go into my basic, pull up my exposure just as a test. We're just seeing how much has been retained, and wow, look how much of that raw file retained that information. So we obviously don't want it that bright, but that allows us to see how much information's here and what it would actually look like. Let's go to that other shot and do kind of the same thing. We're just going to crank up the tone and see. Just crank up the exposure, and yeah, no, honestly, between these two shots, I think the other one's a much more compelling image. This is kind of cool coming down here with the ripples, but once you get over to the center point here, it's just kind of blah. So let's head back over to our other one here and reset our exposure. In this case, I do want to still retain as much information as possible on that bridge. So let's get this guy edited to the bridge pretty much in this point. Now we can always crank up the shadows and just blast shadow detail down there, but instead of doing that, we're going to use another of the masking tools here in a moment. Let's get everything though looking the way we want on the top point. Back, bring up. If I hit the letter Y, like yes, it's going to put a side-by-side of the image in its current state versus its original state for me to see and compare. So far, so good. Let's see here. I did like it when we brought that white balance down a little bit earlier. Vibrance up a little bit. Bring out clarity up a little bit. And let's drop down a mask now. We're going to bring maybe another linear gradient in, and this is going to come up from the bottom. But this time we have a pretty hard line of bright to dark, and I want these to have less feathering than we had before. So I'm going to drag this up here, a little feathering, just to make sure we have an even blend. But let's get that along the line. And let's brighten this area up. Okay, and I'm going to bring it up a little more than I want, just because I do want to see some of that pop out. We're going to bring the highlights up a tiny bit, because we want the brightest spots to pop. Same thing with the whites. This is kind of counterintuitive to what we normally do when we pull down the highlights in a lot of shots. But this is where we kind of want those to stand out, and then I'm going to pull down the shadows. That's going to start to give you some more richness in there, but make those higher kind of glints of grass stand out a bit more. Now, kind of like what's going on here, but let's pull those black levels up a little bit. Never mind, I don't like when I did that, and we lost all the black within there, and there should be some black. There should be some kind of texture or tooth within there. Let's see here. Pretty stark difference already, and let's see before our mask too, before and after. It's looking pretty good. Now in an area like that, where we brought up a lot of that, we might have to also now increase the saturation down there, because maybe the tone didn't have the same richness that we had before. And I'm going to also maybe see what happens when I a little more warmth in that. Yeah, that saturation punch is definitely too much under there, so I'm going to pull that back down. I definitely want it to be balanced and natural. And I think it's just a bit more on the tone side of things. I want to see a bit more of the highlights and whites coming off of that. Alright, now let's close the mask, go back to our global adjustments, and finesse this to make everything fall in place. Remember, this is the entirety of the shot now that we're playing with. Now, that bottom reflection is too bright. It's pulling me out of the shot. So I'm going to go back into my mask. By clicking on mask 1 again, we're re-entering that mask. And then I'm going to actually pull those highlights down until we start to get that vibrance back in there. And then similarly, I'm going to go back to color here and actually make it a little bluer. Kind of want to match that tone that we have up above. It's probably not too far off right about there. Now, in reality, that's looking pretty good, and I can see everything pretty clearly, but I want a little bit more of the eye drawn to the grass kind of running through that island. So I'm going to run one more filter, but I'm going to use the brush filter now. Brush is just what it says. It's going to allow me to brush in whatever tone or color that I want. And in this case, I'm making sure that my flow and density are down somewhere around 50%. It doesn't have to be exact, but that's going to mean that it's not just slathering on the adjustment like you just put a huge thick layer of paint on. This is going to allow me to then go and scrub a little bit more if I want a little bit heavier of an area, or kind of go lighter in one area and be a little more subtle with it. So I'm going to come over here now with my brush. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit, and I'm going to just kind of paint along the island where it's a little darker, but where I want these highlights to really stand out. I'm not going heavy with this. Let's go to our tone here, and then bring up the whites. Bring up the highlights. I might actually be bringing up the exposure, but bringing down the shadows and the blacks. Doesn't look like much, but let's see here. And that's the thing, that little bit of light kind of draws your eye now back into the bridge, and without that, you kind of lose that leading line that comes in there as much. Now, I'm liking the way this is looking. I might take a peek here at just pulling the blacks down a hair. On the global end of things, bringing up the exposure a little bit, and maybe bring the whites down just a little bit. Pretty dramatic difference, I would say. And let's see what happens when I do a tiny little vignette on this. I don't even need to mess with this vignette very much. It's doing pretty good on its own. I like it. Now, the rest of these I'll do in my own time, just because I don't want to bore you with everything here. But let's take a quick look here at these two in full screen. So if I highlight both of these and I hit the letter F, that's going to bring me into full screen. And since they're the only two that are highlighted, I can just hit the arrow key and it's going to go from one to the other. I think they're both great looking shots. This one, though, something about this one just has a sharpness to it. It looks pretty gnarly. I like that quite a bit. Now that I've got that other one edited, I'm going to go ahead and hit 4. That's going to put my 4-star on it. And right now, I'm going to go out to dinner, but I want to show my friend these pictures. So I'm going to go ahead and export these pictures. I'm going to go ahead and just hit export. And these, I just want to go to my desktop. They'll be easy to find that way, but I want to put them in a folder, and I'll call these LA River. I'm going to just scroll down a little bit, make sure that I'm set to a JPEG. I like to go to sRGB when I'm going to be going to web or email, because when you're putting it on a display, this is going to help match the colors better for you. We don't need incredibly high quality since this is just a web-based one. It's not going to be printed. And we're resizing it to fit my long edge to 1920 with a resolution of 72 dpi. That means that we're looking at pretty much screen resolution in HD. And if somebody tries to steal this and make it bigger or whatever they want to do, it's not going to happen very well. So I'm going to go ahead and export. And there we go. That's my whole workflow when it comes to this. I've done this once before with a Death Valley trip too, but every time you go out shooting is different, and the subject matter is very different too, especially when it comes to editing. So I'll probably end up doing this a few more times, but it never hurts to kind of walk through, get a few more feels for the process, see the workflow from start to finish, and also kind of pick up maybe a few more editing tips along the way, just because it's a different type of image than you would normally shoot or than we've done before together. Thanks for joining me today. I'm the Lightroom Whisperer. Keep on Lightrooming.